The crack of thunder split the sky like God's own rifle shot, and Vincent Sawyer jerked awake in his narrow bunk, heart hammering against his ribs as rain began to pound against the roof of his isolated ranch house like 1,000 desperate fists. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his dark hair, listening to the storm rage across the Kansas prairie with a fury he had not witnessed in years. The wind howled like something alive and wounded, battering the wooden walls of his modest home as if determined to tear it apart board by board. He had just swung his legs over the side of the bed when he heard it, a sound that made him freeze completely, barely audible beneath the storm's violent symphony. Someone was knocking at his door. Vincent reached for his pants in the darkness, pulling them on with practiced efficiency before grabbing the oil lamp from his bedside table. His fingers found matches in the drawer, and moments later warm light filled the small bedroom. The knocking came again, more insistent now, and he moved through the main room of his house with cautious steps. It was past midnight, he was certain, and nobody traveled these isolated roads after dark without good reason. His ranch sat a solid 7 miles outside Dodge City, Kansas, far enough from civilization that unexpected visitors were rare even in daylight. He lifted the heavy wooden bar from its brackets and pulled the door open against the wind's resistance. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A woman stood on his porch, soaked completely through, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck. Her dress, once probably a respectable dark blue, clung to her frame, heavy with rainwater. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged with blue, and her eyes, he could see even in the lamp's uncertain light, held a depth of exhaustion and something else he could not quite name. "Please," she said, her voice barely carrying over the storm. "My horse threw a shoe 2 miles back." "I saw your light." Vincent did not hesitate. He stepped aside immediately, pulling the door wider. "Get in here before you catch your death." She stumbled across the threshold, water pooling instantly on his floorboards, and he closed the door against the wind with effort. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25 or so, though her eyes seemed older. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling so hard he thought she might collapse. "I will get you something dry," Vincent said, already moving toward the chest where he kept spare blankets. "And I will build up the fire. Can you manage to stand?" "Yes," she said, though her teeth chattered so violently the word was nearly unintelligible. He worked quickly, stirring the embers in the fireplace and adding fresh wood until flames began to climb and dance. Then he retrieved 2 thick wool blankets and held them out to her. "The bedroom is through there. Get out of those wet things. You can wrap yourself in these. I will make coffee." She took the blankets with shaking hands and disappeared into his bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Vincent set about making coffee, filling his battered tin pot with water from the bucket by the door, and measuring grounds with a steady hand despite the questions racing through his mind. Who was she? Why was she traveling alone at night in an approaching storm, and where had she been heading? By the time she emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in both blankets with her wet hair hanging loose around her shoulders, the coffee was ready and the fire had taken the chill from the main room. She looked slightly less like a ghost now, though still pale and exhausted. "Sit," Vincent said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs near the fire. "Drink this slowly." She obeyed, taking the tin cup he offered with both hands and holding it close to her face, letting the steam warm her skin before taking a careful sip. Vincent lowered himself into the other chair, giving her space and time to recover. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steadier now. "I did not know if I would find shelter." The storm came up faster than I expected. "What were you doing out on the prairie at night?" Vincent asked, keeping his tone neutral and non-accusatory. She looked into her coffee for a long moment before answering. "Running away, I suppose you could say, though that makes me sound like a coward." "Running from what?" Her dark eyes met his, and he saw a flash of something fierce there beneath the exhaustion. "My late husband's family. They wanted me to marry his brother. I refused. They became insistent. I left." "You are a widow then," Vincent said quietly. "For 8 months now." "Clayton died when his wagon overturned last winter. We had only been married a year." She took another sip of coffee. "His family owns a large spread north of Wichita. They have money and influence. When I said I would not marry Robert, Clayton's brother, they told me I had no choice. That I owed them, that I was their property now, Clayton's widow, and their responsibility." Her voice hardened. "I told them I was not property. I left 3 days ago." Vincent felt a slow burn of anger kindle in his chest at the thought of anyone treating this woman, treating any person, as property to be bartered and controlled. He had seen enough ugliness in his 32 years to know the world was full of people who believed might made right, that money and land gave them the authority to dictate the lives of others. "They will be looking for you," he said, "probably." She set the coffee cup on the small table between them. "I have been trying to reach Dodge City. I have an aunt there, my mother's sister. I'm hoping she will take me in, at least until I can find work." "What is your name?" Vincent asked. Catherine Garrett." She paused. "And you?" "Vincent Sawyer. This is my land. Not much of it, but it is mine. 160 acres and this house. I run cattle, just a small herd, and break horses when I can find work." Catherine looked around the modest room with its simple furnishings and rough-hewn walls. "You live here alone?" "I do. Have for 5 years now, since I filed my claim. It must be lonely." Vincent considered this. "I suppose it is. I had not thought about it much. The work keeps me busy." They fell silent, listening to the storm rage outside. Lightning flashed through the single window, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light, followed seconds later by thunder that shook the walls. Catherine flinched slightly at the sound. "You should sleep," Vincent said, standing. "Take the bed." "I will make myself comfortable out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Catherine protested. "You have already done so much. I insist. You need proper rest and warmth. The bed is yours for as long as you need it." She looked up at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. "Thank you, Vincent, truly. I do not know what I would have done if I had not found your house." "You found it," he said simply. "That is what matters. Sleep now. We can talk more in the morning when the storm has passed." Catherine rose, clutching the blankets around herself, and moved toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. "Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Catherine." When the door closed, Vincent stood alone in the firelight, staring into the flames and wondering what exactly he had invited into his home. Not that he regretted it, not for a moment. No decent person could have turned a woman away in such a storm. But he could feel already that something had shifted, that his quiet, solitary life had just become considerably more complicated. He made himself as comfortable as possible in the chair, pulling his own blanket over his shoulders. Sleep would not come easily tonight, he suspected. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Kansas prairie, and somewhere inside his modest house, a widow who had fled her dead husband's family slept in his bed. When dawn finally broke, the storm had exhausted itself, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Vincent woke stiff and sore from his night in the chair and spent a few minutes coaxing life back into the fire. He was just setting the coffee pot to boil when the bedroom door opened and Catherine emerged, still wrapped in the blankets, her hair a tangle of dark waves around her face. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Morning. Coffee will be ready soon. Are you hungry?" "Starving, actually." She offered a small smile. "I have not eaten much the past few days, mostly just what I could carry with me. I can make eggs and biscuits, nothing fancy, but it will fill you up." "That sounds wonderful." Vincent set about preparing breakfast while Catherine sat at the small table, watching him work. He was acutely aware of her presence in a way that made him feel oddly self-conscious. He was not accustomed to having anyone in his space, let alone a beautiful woman wrapped in blankets in his main room. "I should check on your horse," he said as he cracked eggs into his cast iron skillet. "Where did you leave it?" "Tied to a tree about a quarter-mile down your road." "At least I think it was a quarter-mile. Everything looked different in the storm." "After breakfast, I will ride out and bring it back. I have horseshoes in the barn. I can fix the shoe myself." "You do not have to do that. If you could just point me toward Dodge City, I can walk from here." Vincent turned from the stove to look at her directly. "It is 7 miles to town. You are in no condition to walk that far, and your horse cannot carry you without a shoe. Let me help. I have nowhere I need to be today." Catherine studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to discern his motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "All right, thank you again. I seem to keep saying that." "No thanks necessary. It is just common decency." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the morning sunlight streaming through the window and warming the room. Vincent found himself stealing glances at Catherine when he thought she was not looking. In the daylight, with color returning to her face, she was striking. Not beautiful in a delicate way, but with strong features and an intelligent, determined expression that spoke of backbone and character. After they finished eating, Vincent retrieved some of his own clothes for Catherine to wear. His shirts and pants would be far too large for her, but they were dry and would allow her own dress to finish drying by the fire. "I will turn around," he said, handing her the clothes. "Thank you." There was amusement in her voice now, some of the exhaustion and fear from the previous night beginning to fade. When he turned back around, she stood wearing his clothes, the shirt hanging nearly to her knees and the pants belted tightly at her waist. She had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs multiple times. Despite the comical fit, she looked more comfortable than she had in the wet dress. "I look ridiculous," she said, but she was smiling. "You look warm and dry. That is what matters." Vincent grabbed his hat from its peg by the door. "I am going to find your horse. Stay inside and rest. There is more coffee if you want it." "Vincent." She caught his arm as he moved toward the door, her fingers light against his sleeve. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be anyone." He looked down at where her hand rested on his arm, then met her eyes. "Everyone deserves help when they need it, and you showed up at my door in a storm. What kind of man would I be if I turned you away?" "A normal one, probably," she said softly. "Most people would not have let a stranger into their home like this." "Then I suppose I am not most people." He tipped his hat to her and stepped out into the bright morning. The prairie stretched out in all directions, endless and beautiful, the grass still heavy with rain and sparkling in the sunlight. Vincent saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Duke, and rode slowly down the muddy track that served as his road, scanning the tree line for Catherine's mount. He found the horse exactly where she had said, a tired-looking mare with good bloodlines, standing patient and three-legged where Catherine had tied it. The missing shoe lay in the mud nearby. Vincent dismounted and approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The mare accepted his presence without fuss, clearly accustomed to handling. He led both horses back to his barn and set about the work of replacing the shoe. It was familiar, meditative labor, and it gave him time to think about his unexpected guest. Catherine was in trouble. That much was clear. If her late husband's family had money and influence, they would not take kindly to her running away. They would search for her, and they might search here if they traced her route. The thought made Vincent's jaw tighten. He did not like bullies, never had. The idea that people would try to force a widow into an unwanted marriage, would claim ownership over her as if she were livestock, stirred something protective and fierce in his chest. When he returned to the house with Catherine's mare, he found her standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She had tied her hair back with a piece of string and looked more like herself, more settled and less like a frightened refugee. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the pot. "I found beans and some salt pork. I thought I could make us lunch as a thank you for everything you have done." "I do not mind at all." Vincent hung his hat and moved to wash his hands in the basin. "Your horse is fixed. She is in the barn resting and eating. Good animal." She was Clayton's. The only thing I took from his family besides my own belongings and the clothes I was wearing. Catherine's expression clouded briefly. "I suppose technically she belongs to them. They probably consider me a horse thief on top of everything else." "If she was your husband's, she is yours now," Vincent said firmly. "That is how inheritance works." Not according to Robert. He said everything that was Clayton's became theirs when he died, including me. Bitterness crept into her voice. Vincent sat down at the table watching her work at the stove. "Did you love him? Your husband?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, stirring the beans with slow, thoughtful movements. "I thought I did when I married him. He was kind to me, treated me well. But we barely had time to really know each other before the accident. Sometimes I think I married him more because I wanted to escape my father's house than because of any great passion." She glanced over her shoulder at him. "Does that make me terrible?" "It makes you honest. Lots of people marry for practical reasons." "Did you ever marry?" "No. Came close once back in Missouri before I moved out here. But she decided she did not want to be a rancher's wife. She married a banker instead." "Do you regret it?" Vincent considered the question. "I regret that I was not what she needed. But I do not regret the life I built here. This is where I am supposed to be." They ate lunch together, the conversation flowing more easily now, touching on lighter subjects. Catherine asked about his ranch, about his cattle and horses, about life in Kansas. Vincent found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years, enjoying the simple pleasure of another person's company. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent showed Catherine around the property. The barn with its handful of horses and the small corral where he did his breaking work. The modest vegetable garden behind the house that provided most of his food through the warmer months. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of his property, swollen now from the previous night's rain. "It is a good piece of land," Catherine said, standing on the creek bank and looking back toward the house. "You have built something real here. It is not much, but it is mine. That matters more than I can properly explain." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I understand exactly what you mean. Ownership, independence, the ability to make your own choices." She paused. "That is what I want, what I am trying to find." "You will find it," Vincent said with certainty. "Your aunt in Dodge City, will she help you?" "I hope so." "I have not seen her in 5 years, not since I was 20 and my mother died. But we wrote letters. She never approved of my father or of my marrying Clayton so young. She told me I should come to her, make my own way. I should have listened then." "We all have to learn our own lessons," Vincent said. "You were young, and now you are here, making different choices." They walked back to the house as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Vincent found himself walking slower than necessary, reluctant to see the afternoon end. There was something comfortable about Catherine's presence, something that made his usually quiet house feel more like a home. That evening, Catherine insisted on cooking supper while Vincent saw to the evening chores. When he returned to the house, the smell of frying meat and onions greeted him, along with fresh bread warming near the fire. The table was set with his simple dishes, and Catherine had even found the 2 candles he kept for emergencies, lighting them to provide soft light as darkness fell outside. "This is wonderful," Vincent said, sitting down to the meal she had prepared. "It feels good to cook for someone besides myself," Catherine admitted. "I was never the best cook, but Clayton's mother insisted I learn properly after we married. I suppose that is one useful thing that came from that year." They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the conversation. Vincent found himself telling Catherine things he had not spoken of in years. About growing up in Missouri, about his father's farm, and why he had left to seek his own fortune. About the loneliness of the past 5 years, and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Catherine shared her own stories. Growing up with a hard father who believed women existed only to serve men and bear children. Her mother's quiet strength, and the way she had protected Catherine as much as she could. The relief she had felt when Clayton proposed, thinking it meant escape, only to find herself in a different kind of cage. "But you got out," Vincent said. "That took courage or desperation." Catherine smiled slightly. "I am not sure there is much difference sometimes." When they had finished eating and cleaned up together, they sat by the fire as they had the night before. But tonight felt different, more settled, less like host and unexpected guest, and more like 2 people who had known each other longer than a single day. "I should probably ride into Dodge City tomorrow," Catherine said quietly, staring into the flames. "Find my aunt and start figuring out what comes next." Vincent felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at the thought of her leaving, but he nodded. "I will take you." 7 miles is too far to ride alone if you are not familiar with the area. You have already done so much. One more thing will not hurt. He looked at her profile, illuminated by firelight, and felt something shift inside his chest. "Besides, I want to make sure you get there safely." Catherine turned her head to meet his gaze, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Vincent felt his heart rate increase, felt an awareness of her presence that went beyond simple hospitality or kindness. There was something between them, something neither of them had spoken aloud but that hung in the air nonetheless. "All right," Catherine said softly. "Thank you, Vincent, for everything." That night, Vincent again gave Catherine his bed and made himself comfortable by the fire. But he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds of her breathing from the other room. Something had changed, he realized. In the space of a day and a night, this woman who had appeared on his doorstep in a storm had become important to him in a way he could not fully articulate. He thought about her leaving tomorrow, about watching her ride away toward Dodge City, and a life that did not include him. The thought sat heavy in his chest like a stone. But what right did he have to ask her to stay? He barely knew her. She had her own plans, her own needs. She was looking for independence, for freedom from being controlled by others. He would not add himself to the list of people trying to dictate her choices. Still, as sleep finally claimed him in the early hours of the morning, Vincent found himself hoping that somehow, in some way, Catherine might choose to stay. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the ride to Dodge City. Catherine's dress had dried overnight, and she changed back into it after breakfast, emerging from the bedroom looking more like the proper widow she was. Vincent saddled both horses while she packed her few belongings into the worn leather bag she had carried with her. "Ready," he asked when they were both mounted. "As I will ever be." Catherine managed a smile, though he could see nervousness in her eyes. "What if my aunt has moved? What if she does not want to take me in?" "Then we will figure something else out," Vincent said firmly. "One problem at a time." They rode toward Dodge City at an easy pace, following the rutted wagon road that connected Vincent's ranch to the wider world. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful, the grass still green from spring rains and dotted with late wildflowers. Vincent pointed out landmarks as they rode, orienting Catherine to the area. "The river is about 2 miles north of here," he said, gesturing. "Good fishing if you know where to look. And there is a box canyon about 5 miles west that I use for cattle when I need to separate them from the main herd." "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" Catherine asked. "Since I was a boy. My father farmed and I hated it. The same crops year after year, tied to the same piece of ground. I wanted something different, space, freedom, the chance to work with animals instead of just dirt." He smiled slightly. "I suppose that sounds foolish." "Not at all. It sounds like you knew what you wanted and went after it." "That is more than most people can say." They talked easily as they rode, the conversation flowing naturally between them. Vincent found himself memorizing details about her. The way she sat her horse with easy confidence despite everything she had been through. The way her eyes lit up when she laughed. The thoughtful pauses she took before answering questions, as if she weighed her words carefully. Dodge City came into view just after midday, sprawling and rough along the banks of the Arkansas River. It was a young town, only a few years old, built primarily to serve the cattle trade that had exploded after the war. The railroad had reached Dodge in 1872, and since then it had grown from a collection of temporary structures into a real settlement, though it still retained its wild, unfinished character. Vincent guided them down Front Street, the town's main thoroughfare. Even in the early afternoon, the street bustled with activity. Cowboys fresh off the trail, townspeople going about their business, freight wagons hauling goods to and from the railroad. The smell of cattle and horses mixed with dust and wood smoke. "It is bigger than I expected," Catherine said, looking around with wide eyes. "It has grown fast. 5 years ago there was almost nothing here. Now there must be 1,000 people, maybe more during cattle season. You come into town often, once a month or so for supplies." "I am not much for crowds." They rode slowly through the streets, drawing a few curious glances from passers-by. Vincent was known by sight if not by name to most of the regular townspeople, but Catherine was clearly a stranger, and strangers always attracted attention. "Where does your aunt live?" Vincent asked. "She runs a boarding house on 3rd Street, or at least she did 5 years ago. The letters I received had that address." Vincent nodded and guided them toward the appropriate street. Dodge City's layout was straightforward, a grid of streets running parallel and perpendicular to the railroad tracks. 3rd Street was one of the more respectable areas, away from the saloons and gambling halls that lined Front Street. They found the boarding house easily enough, a 2-story frame building with a painted sign out front that read "Garrett Boarding House, Clean Rooms, Fair Prices." Vincent's heart sank slightly when he saw the name. Catherine's aunt clearly still operated the business. Catherine dismounted with shaking hands. Vincent could see the nervousness written plainly across her face. He dismounted as well and stood beside her, a silent source of support. "I am terrified," she admitted quietly. "What if she turns me away?" "She will not." Vincent said it with more confidence than he felt. "But I will be right here either way." Catherine took a deep breath, squared her shoulders and walked up the steps to the front door. She knocked firmly, and after a moment the door swung open to reveal a tall, spare woman with graying dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple dark dress and an apron, and her face was lined with years of work and worry. The woman's eyes widened when she saw Catherine. "Lord above, is that you, Catherine? Catherine Parker?" "Garrett now," Catherine said quietly. "I'm married. But yes, Aunt Margaret, it is me." Margaret stepped forward and pulled Catherine into a fierce embrace. "Child, I have been so worried. I got your letter 3 months ago about Clayton's death, and then nothing. I did not know if you were well, if you needed help, if his family was treating you right." She pulled back, holding Catherine at arm's length and studying her face. "What are you doing here? And who is this?" "This is Vincent Sawyer," Catherine said, gesturing to where he stood waiting by the horses. "He helped me. I ran away from Clayton's family. They wanted me to marry his brother, and I refused, and they were not going to let me leave. I have been traveling for 3 days. I got caught in the storm 2 nights ago, and Vincent took me in." Margaret's sharp eyes moved to Vincent, assessing him with the kind of thoroughness that came from years of taking in boarders and judging character quickly. Whatever she saw must have passed muster, because she nodded briskly. "Then you have my gratitude, Mr. Sawyer. Come inside, both of you. We will have tea and talk properly." The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, if plainly furnished. Margaret led them to a small sitting room off the main hall and bustled away to prepare tea. Catherine sank into one of the chairs and let out a long breath. "She seems glad to see you," Vincent observed, taking the seat across from her. "She does, thank God. I was so afraid." Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have nowhere else to go, Vincent. If she had turned me away, I do not know what I would have done. You would have figured something out. You are stronger than you think." Margaret returned with a tea tray and poured for all of them before settling into her own chair with the air of a general preparing for battle. "Now then, tell me everything, Catherine. Leave nothing out." Catherine recounted her story, starting with Clayton's death the previous winter and ending with her arrival at Vincent's door 2 nights ago. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker as the tale unfolded. "Those contemptible, grasping people," she said when Catherine finished. "Treating you like property. I never liked that family, never thought they were good enough for you. But you were so determined to marry Clayton, to get away from your father, and I thought maybe it would be all right. I should have insisted you come here instead. I made my own choices, Aunt Margaret, and I am making them now. That is why I am here. I need a place to stay while I find work, while I figure out what to do next. I can pay you something, not much, but I have a little money saved." "Nonsense. You will stay here and help me run the boarding house. I have been trying to manage it alone since my own husband died 2 years ago, and it is too much work for one person. You will earn your keep, and we will be family again. That is how it will be." Relief washed over Catherine's face so completely that Vincent felt his own chest loosen in response. She had a safe place now, somewhere to land and rebuild. "Thank you," Catherine whispered. "You do not know what this means to me. I know exactly what it means." Margaret reached over and squeezed Catherine's hand. "You are home now, child, truly home. No one will force you into anything here." They stayed for another hour, drinking tea and talking. Margaret asked Vincent questions about his ranch, about how he had come to be in Kansas, assessing him with that same sharp attention. Vincent answered honestly, feeling oddly like he was being interviewed, though he could not say for what position. Finally, as the afternoon wore on, Vincent stood. "I should head back. It is a long ride, and I want to reach home before dark." Catherine stood as well, walking with him to the door while Margaret discreetly remained in the sitting room. Outside, on the boarding house porch, Catherine turned to face him fully. "I do not know how to thank you, Vincent. You saved my life. If you had not opened your door that night, if you had not taken me in and helped me, I do not know what would have happened. You would have found another house, another person to help, but I am glad it was mine you found." He hesitated, wanting to say more but uncertain how to express the tangled feelings in his chest. Catherine seemed to sense his struggle. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm, the same gesture she had made the previous morning. "Will I see you again?" "I come into town for supplies once a month or so," Vincent said, acutely aware of her hand on his arm, of the warmth of her presence. "Maybe I will stop by, make sure you are settling in all right. I would like that very much." They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite willing to break the connection. Finally, Vincent tipped his hat to her and descended the steps to where Duke waited. He mounted and turned the horse toward home, glancing back once to see Catherine still standing on the porch, watching him ride away. The journey back to his ranch felt longer than the journey out, though he knew logically it was the same distance. The sun sank lower in the sky, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. Vincent replayed the past 2 days in his mind, examining each conversation, each moment, trying to understand why the thought of Catherine staying in Dodge City felt both right and wrong at the same time. Right because she was safe now, because she had family and a place to stay, and the chance to build the independent life she wanted. Wrong because it meant she was 7 miles away instead of sleeping in his bedroom and cooking in his kitchen and filling his house with life and warmth. He had known her for less than 3 days, Vincent reminded himself. It was absurd to feel this attached to someone so quickly. And yet he could not deny the hollow feeling in his chest, the sense that he had lost something important even though it had never really been his to lose. When he reached his ranch as twilight fell, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Vincent saw to Duke's care, then went inside and lit a lamp. Catherine's presence lingered in subtle ways. The blankets she had used, now folded neatly on the chair. The dishes from breakfast, washed and put away. The faint scent of her hair. Vincent made himself a simple supper and sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from him. This was foolish, he told himself. He had lived alone for 5 years and been perfectly content. One woman's brief presence should not have the power to make him feel lonely. But it did. Over the following week, Vincent threw himself into work with unusual intensity. He mended fences that did not strictly need mending, broke a new horse that he had been putting off for months, and reorganized his entire barn for no good reason except to keep his hands and mind busy. But no matter how hard he worked, Catherine's face appeared in his thoughts. Her voice, her laugh, the serious way she listened when he talked. He told himself he would wait 2 weeks before going into town. That would give her time to settle in, time to adjust to her new life without him hovering. But as the days passed, 2 weeks began to feel like an eternity. 10 days after leaving Catherine in Dodge City, Vincent finally gave in. He rode into town under the pretense of needing supplies, though his stores were actually quite adequate. He had no idea if Catherine would even want to see him, if she had moved on from their brief acquaintance and built a new life that had no room for a rough rancher who lived 7 miles from civilization. The boarding house looked the same as it had 10 days earlier. Vincent tied Duke to the hitching post out front and stood for a moment, gathering his courage. He felt like a schoolboy calling on a girl, nervous and uncertain and slightly foolish. Before he could knock, the door opened and Margaret stood there, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Sawyer, I wondered if you might come by." "I was in town for supplies," Vincent said, aware of how transparent the lie probably was. "Thought I would check and see how Catherine is settling in." "She is in the kitchen, helping with supper preparations. Go on through." Margaret stepped aside, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Second door on the left." Vincent followed her directions, walking through the neat hallway to the kitchen. He could hear voices as he approached, Catherine's laugh rising above the others. He paused in the doorway, momentarily arrested by the sight of her. She stood at a large wooden table, flour dusting her hands and apron, rolling out dough alongside another younger woman. Her hair was pinned up, and her face was flushed with warmth from the stove. She looked happy, settled, more relaxed than he had seen her during her brief stay at his ranch. Then she looked up and saw him, and her whole face transformed. "Vincent!" She dropped the rolling pin and crossed the kitchen quickly, stopping just short of embracing him, suddenly aware perhaps of the impropriety. "I did not expect to see you. Is everything all right?" "Fine. I was in town and thought I would stop by." The other woman at the table, a young blonde with a knowing smile, cleared her throat. "I am going to check on the bread in the other oven. Take your time." When they were alone, Catherine gestured to the table. "Sit, please. Let me wash my hands and I will make coffee." "You do not have to stop working on my account. I want to." She washed quickly at the basin and dried her hands on her apron. "I am so glad you came. I have been thinking about you, wondering how you were." "Have you?" Vincent felt absurdly pleased by this admission. "Of course." "You were so kind to me, Vincent. I will never forget that." She set about making coffee, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew their way around a kitchen. "The past 10 days have been good. Busy, but good. Aunt Margaret has been wonderful. She treats me like a daughter, not a burden." "I am glad. You deserve that." They talked while the coffee brewed, catching each other up on the past 10 days. Catherine told him about life at the boarding house, about the various characters who stayed there and the work of cooking and cleaning for a dozen boarders. Vincent talked about the horse he had broken and the fence repairs he had completed, carefully not mentioning how empty his house had felt. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the kitchen table together, the domesticity of the moment striking Vincent with unexpected force. This felt right in a way he could not articulate. Sitting with Catherine, drinking coffee, talking about their days, it felt like something he wanted to do every day for the rest of his life. The realization shocked him with its clarity and certainty. He was in love with her. He had fallen in love with a widow who had shown up at his door in a storm, and now he had no idea what to do about it. "Vincent," Catherine's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you all right? You looked very far away just then." "I am fine, just thinking." "About what?" He could not tell her the truth, not yet. It was too soon, too presumptuous. So he said instead, "About how different my life was 2 weeks ago, before the storm." Catherine's expression softened. "Mine too. I was terrified 2 weeks ago, running from people who wanted to control me, unsure if I would find safety or help. And then I found you." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You changed everything, Vincent. You gave me the chance to start over." Vincent turned his hand under hers, their palms touching, fingers intertwining. The contact sent warmth flooding through him. "I am glad I could help, but you did the hard part. You are the one who ran, who fought for your freedom. We helped each other then." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the kitchen table, until the sound of footsteps in the hall made Catherine pull away. Margaret appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with shrewd eyes. "Mr. Sawyer, will you stay for supper?" "We have more than enough, and I suspect Catherine would enjoy the company." Vincent glanced at Catherine, who nodded eagerly. "Please stay. I would like that." "Then I will. Thank you, Mrs. Garrett." Supper at the boarding house was a lively affair. The long table in the dining room seated a dozen people, all of them boarders with their own stories and reasons for being in Dodge City. There was a young couple newly arrived from Ohio, hoping to file a homestead claim. A traveling salesman with a ready laugh and an inexhaustible supply of stories. Two cowboys working at one of the big ranches outside town. A widow similar in age to Margaret who helped with the housework in exchange for reduced rent. Vincent found himself seated next to Catherine, acutely aware of her presence beside him, the way their elbows occasionally brushed, the sound of her voice as she talked and laughed with the other diners. He could see why she seemed happy here. This was a real community, people sharing meals and lives. It was so different from his solitary existence on the ranch. After supper, as the other boarders dispersed to their evening activities, Vincent helped Catherine and Margaret clear the table and wash dishes. It was comfortable domestic work, and Vincent found himself imagining doing this every night, being part of this household, this life. When the kitchen was clean, Margaret shooed them out. "Go sit on the porch. Enjoy the evening air. I can manage the rest." Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Vincent and Catherine sat on the porch steps, listening to the sounds of Dodge City settling into night. A piano played somewhere down the street, and voices drifted on the warm air. "Thank you for coming today," Catherine said quietly. "It meant a great deal to me. I wanted to see you, make sure you were well." "I am. Better than I have been in a long time, actually. I feel safe here, Vincent, free, like I can finally breathe properly." "Good. That is what you deserve." Catherine turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the twilight. "What about you? Are you happy out there on your ranch all alone?" The question caught Vincent off guard with its directness. He thought about lying, about saying he was perfectly content with his solitary life. But he found he could not lie to her. "I was," he said slowly, "before. But these past 10 days the house has felt emptier than it used to. I find myself wishing for company, wishing for someone to talk to at the end of the day. You could come into town more often. Visit." "I could." He paused, then decided to take a risk. "Or you could come visit the ranch, see it properly in daylight when you are not half frozen and terrified." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I would like that, very much. When? Whenever you can get away. Next Sunday, maybe, if Margaret can spare you." "I will ask her, but I think she will say yes. She likes you, I can tell." They sat together until full darkness fell, talking quietly about everything and nothing. When Vincent finally stood to leave, Catherine walked him to where Duke waited. "Sunday, then," she said. "Sunday. I will come fetch you in the morning. I will be ready." Vincent rode home through the darkness, his heart lighter than it had been in days. Sunday felt both impossibly far away and dangerously close. He spent the week preparing, cleaning his house more thoroughly than he had in months, repairing the broken step on the front porch, even picking wildflowers from the prairie to put in a jar on the table. When Sunday morning arrived, Vincent woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. He dressed with unusual care, choosing his best shirt and making sure his hair was properly combed. He felt ridiculous, like a young man preparing for his first dance, but he could not help himself. The ride into Dodge City seemed to take forever. When he finally reached the boarding house, Catherine was waiting on the porch, dressed in a simple calico dress with a bonnet to protect her face from the sun. She smiled when she saw him, and Vincent felt his nervousness ease slightly. "Good morning," she called out. "I have been watching for you." "Good morning. Ready to see the ranch properly, more than ready." They rode back together, the morning sun warm on their shoulders. Catherine asked questions about everything they passed, interested in the land and the way it changed with the seasons. Vincent found himself talking more than usual, enjoying her genuine curiosity. When they reached his property, Vincent showed her everything properly this time. The barn with its neat stalls and tack room, the small corral and the larger pasture beyond where his cattle grazed. The vegetable garden, now flourishing in the summer heat. The creek with its cottonwood trees providing shade. "It really is beautiful," Catherine said, standing on the creek bank and looking around. "Peaceful. I can see why you love it here." "It is home," Vincent said simply. "The first place that has ever really felt like mine." They walked back to the house, and Vincent made them lunch while Catherine sat at the table, watching him work. The ease between them had only grown over the past weeks, the initial awkwardness of their first meeting replaced by genuine comfort and affection. "Vincent," Catherine said as they ate, "can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you never marry? You said you came close once, but what about after? In the 5 years you have been here," Vincent set down his fork and thought about how to answer. "I suppose I never met anyone who made me want to give up my solitude. Never met anyone I could imagine sharing this life with. Never." Catherine's eyes were serious, searching his face. "Not until recently." The words hung in the air between them, their meaning clear. Catherine drew in a sharp breath, her hand moving to her throat. "Vincent, what are you saying?" He could back away now, could laugh it off and pretend he meant nothing serious. But he had never been a coward, and he would not start now. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I am saying that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you appeared at my door," Vincent said quietly. "I am saying that the house felt wrong after you left, empty in a way it never did before. I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you, Catherine. And I do not know what to do about it because you have just escaped one situation where people tried to control you, and the last thing I want is to make you feel pressured or trapped." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You foolish, wonderful man. Do you really not know?" "Know what?" "That I feel the same way. That I have been thinking about you constantly. That coming back here today felt like coming home in a way the boarding house never has." She cupped his face with both hands. "I am falling in love with you too, Vincent. I think I started falling that first night when you did not ask me a single question before helping me, when you gave me your bed and asked for nothing in return." Vincent felt something tight and anxious in his chest finally release. "You are sure? This is not just gratitude or relief at being safe, I am sure. I know my own heart, Vincent, and my heart wants you." He leaned forward and kissed her then, a soft, tentative press of lips that sent warmth flooding through his entire body. Catherine made a small sound of happiness and kissed him back, her hands sliding from his face to his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his hands on her waist. "What do we do now?" "I do not know," Catherine admitted with a shaky laugh. "I was not expecting this, any of this. Neither was I, but I do not want to let you go, Catherine. I want you here with me. I want to wake up every morning and see you across the breakfast table. I want to spend my evenings talking with you by the fire. I want to build a life together." "It is too fast," Catherine whispered, but she did not pull away. "We have known each other less than a month." "I know. And if you need time, I will give it to you. I will wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to know how I feel. I needed you to know." Catherine pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I do not want to rush into another marriage, Vincent. I need time to be just myself, to figure out who I am when I am not defined by a husband or a father or anyone else. I need to know I am choosing this because I want it, not because I am afraid or desperate. I understand, and I would never ask you to give up your independence. Whatever we build together, it will be a partnership, equal. You will always have a say in your own life. You promise that. I swear it on everything I hold sacred." Catherine studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then here is what I propose. We court properly. You come into town to see me, I come out here to see you. We take our time and get to know each other without rushing. And when we are both ready, if we are both still certain, then we talk about what comes next." "That sounds perfect," Vincent said, relief and joy warring in his chest. "Though I have to warn you, I am not going to change my mind. I already know what I want. We will see." But Catherine was smiling, and when she kissed him again, Vincent tasted promise and hope and the beginning of something true. The following months unfolded like a beautiful dream. Vincent rode into Dodge City every Sunday without fail, spending the day with Catherine. They walked through town together, attended church services, had lunch at the boarding house with Margaret and the other boarders. Vincent became a familiar presence, and the townspeople grew accustomed to seeing him and Catherine together. On alternating Sundays, Catherine rode out to the ranch. Vincent taught her about cattle and horses, about reading the weather and the land. She helped him in the garden and learned to cook over his temperamental stove. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. As summer deepened into autumn, their relationship deepened as well. The initial passion mellowed into something stronger and more lasting. Vincent found himself unable to imagine life without Catherine, and she told him repeatedly that she felt the same. In September, as the prairie grass turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Catherine told Vincent she was ready. They were sitting by the creek, watching the water flow past, when she said, "I've had enough time. I know my own heart, and I know it belongs to you." Vincent turned to her, his pulse quickening. "What are you saying?" "I am saying yes, Vincent, to all of it. To marriage, to partnership, to building a life together here on this ranch, if you still want that." "If I still want it," Vincent laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "Catherine, I have wanted nothing else for months. Are you certain, completely certain?" "I love you, Vincent Sawyer. You are the best man I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and happiness into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, he said, When can we marry?" "Soon. Before winter if possible. I do not want to wait any longer." They rode into town together that afternoon to tell Margaret the news. She was unsurprised but delighted, pulling them both into fierce hugs and immediately beginning to plan. "We will have the wedding here at the boarding house. Nothing too fancy but proper. You deserve a proper celebration." The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a bright October afternoon. The boarding house parlor was packed with guests. Margaret had invited half of Dodge City, it seemed. The townspeople had grown fond of both Vincent and Catherine over the months, and they turned out in force to witness the union. Catherine wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the prairie woven into her hair. Vincent wore his best suit, pressed and brushed until it looked nearly new. They stood before the traveling preacher who made regular circuits through the area and spoke their vows with clear, steady voices. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Catherine with all the love and promise he could convey. The parlor erupted in applause and cheers. The reception that followed was loud and joyful, full of food and music and dancing. As the sun set and the party showed no signs of slowing, Vincent and Catherine slipped away, riding toward the ranch under a sky full of stars. They had debated spending their first night at a hotel in town, but both agreed they wanted to begin their married life in their home on their land. The house was dark when they arrived, but Vincent had left lanterns ready to light. Soon warm light filled the main room and Catherine stood in the center, turning slowly to look around. "It looks different now," she said. "It looks like home." "It is home," Vincent confirmed, moving to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Our home now, for as long as we both shall live." Catherine turned in his arms and kissed him, and Vincent lifted her easily, carrying her toward the bedroom. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of the love they had built and the future that stretched before them. The first year of their marriage was one of the happiest times of Vincent's life. Catherine took to ranch life with enthusiasm and determination. She learned to help with the cattle, to garden efficiently, to manage their small household with the same skill she had shown at the boarding house. More than that, she was his partner in all things, offering opinions and ideas, working beside him to build something greater than either of them could have achieved alone. They expanded the house that first year, adding a second bedroom and a proper kitchen. Vincent taught Catherine to ride better, and she became confident handling the horses. Together they increased the cattle herd, saving every penny they could to buy more breeding stock. Margaret visited regularly, pleased to see Catherine so happy and settled. "You chose well," she told Vincent one afternoon while Catherine was in the garden. "Not many men would have taken in a stranger the way you did, or been patient enough to let her find her own way." "Catherine is easy to love," Vincent replied simply, "and easy to trust. She makes me better than I would be alone." In the spring of their second year together, Catherine told Vincent she was expecting a child. The news filled him with a joy so profound he could hardly speak. He pulled her close, one hand resting gently on her still flat stomach, and felt tears prick his eyes. "We are going to have a baby," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are going to be a father, Vincent. And you are going to be a mother. The best mother any child could ask for." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Catherine remained healthy and strong, continuing to help with the ranch work until she grew too large to comfortably ride or do heavy lifting. Vincent fussed over her constantly, which she bore with patient amusement. Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving quickly and healthily with Margaret in attendance to help with the delivery. Vincent held the tiny, red-faced infant with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the perfection of him. "What should we name him?" Catherine asked, tired but radiant in the bed. Vincent thought for a moment. "Matthew, after my father, Matthew Sawyer." "Matthew," Catherine repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Matthew was a happy baby, easy-going and content. He grew quickly, thriving on ranch life. By the time he was 2, he was toddling around after Vincent, imitating everything his father did. Catherine was pregnant again, and this time they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah. The years unfolded in a pattern of work and love and family. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They added more land, more cattle, built a proper barn, and expanded the house again. Vincent became known throughout the region as an honest dealer and a skilled cattleman. Catherine managed their finances with a sharp mind for business, ensuring they saved and invested wisely. Matthew and Sarah grew into healthy, happy children, learning the rhythms of ranch life from an early age. They attended the schoolhouse in Dodge City when old enough, riding in with Catherine each morning and back each evening. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on her great niece and nephew with unabashed affection. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent and Catherine sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sun set over their land while Matthew and Sarah played in the yard with the ranch dogs. Catherine leaned against Vincent's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you remember the night I showed up at your door?" she asked quietly. "I remember everything about that night. The storm, how terrified you looked, how brave you were despite your fear. I was running away from one life and had no idea what I was running toward. I was so scared, Vincent. And then you opened the door and everything changed. For both of us. Vincent kissed the top of her head. You changed everything for me, Catherine. Before you, I thought I was content alone. I did not understand what I was missing. What were you missing? This, all of this. A partner, a family, a real home, love. He pulled her closer. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I loved you quite a lot that day. Catherine tilted her face up to kiss him softly. I love you too, more than I have words to express. You gave me everything I needed when I needed it most. Safety, respect, partnership, love. You never tried to control me or own me. You let me be myself. You are extraordinary all on your own. I just gave you space to shine. They sat together as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, counting their blessings and dreaming of the future. Matthew would turn 11 soon, already talking about raising his own cattle someday. Sarah, at 8, was showing an interest in horses that rivaled Vincent's own. They were good children, smart and kind, growing up with the values their parents held dear. More years passed in this fashion, each one building on the last. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Matthew eventually took over much of the day-to-day cattle work, proving to have his father's skill with animals. Sarah married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, and they built their own place with help from Vincent and Catherine. When Matthew was 23, he married a schoolteacher from Dodge City, a bright young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far corner of the ranch property, and soon Matthew and Elizabeth were expecting their first child. Vincent and Catherine, now in their 50s, settled into the role of grandparents with joy. Their grandson, named Clayton after Catherine's first husband in a gesture of healing and peace, was a delight. Sarah and her husband added 3 more grandchildren to the family over the following years. The ranch that had started as Vincent's solitary claim had become something greater, a legacy that would continue through generations. On warm summer evenings, the whole family gathered at the main house for supper, the table extended to accommodate everyone, filled with food and laughter and love. Vincent and Catherine had built something lasting, something real. Their love story, which had begun with a desperate widow appearing at a cowboy's door in a storm, had grown into a lifetime of partnership and devotion. As they grew older together, their love only deepened. They knew each other completely, anticipated each other's needs and thoughts. They still sat on the porch each evening when weather permitted, still held hands while watching the sunset, still talked for hours about their lives and dreams and memories. One evening, 30 years after that fateful storm, Vincent and Catherine sat in their usual spots on the porch. Their hair was gray now, their faces lined with age, but their eyes still held the same warmth and love they had shared since the beginning. "You have any regrets?" Catherine asked, a question she had never posed before. Vincent considered carefully. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, and you were worth everything. What about you?" "No regrets either, except perhaps that I wish I had more time, more years with you." "A lifetime does not feel like enough." "We still have time," Vincent said, squeezing her hand gently, "and we will make the most of every day we have left." "Promise me something," Catherine said, her voice serious. "Anything. Promise me that you will remember. Remember that night, that storm, the moment everything changed. Promise me you will tell our grandchildren the story so they understand where this all began." "I promise. Though I could never forget. How could I forget the night my whole life changed? The night the widow showed up at my door in a storm, and I let her in and never asked her to leave." Catherine smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I never wanted to leave. From that first morning, when you gave me coffee and offered help without asking anything in return, I think some part of me knew I had found home." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had built a life from nothing but love and determination. The ranch around them stood as testament to their partnership, to the family they had created, to the legacy they would leave behind. Matthew and his family still lived on the property, managing most of the daily operations now that Vincent and Catherine had begun to slow down. Sarah visited often with her children, filling the house with noise and laughter. Margaret had passed away 5 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, but her memory lived on in the stories they told and the values she had instilled. Vincent and Catherine lived 10 more years after that evening conversation. Years filled with the joy of watching their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. They remained partners until the end, still finishing each other's sentences, still seeking each other's counsel on important matters. When Catherine passed away at the age of 71, peacefully in her sleep with Vincent holding her hand, he grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 43 years together, years filled with more love and happiness than most people ever knew. He had kept his promise to her, never trying to control her, always treating her as an equal partner, loving her with everything he had. Vincent lived 2 more years after Catherine's death, years spent with his family and tending to the ranch. He told their story often, especially to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who gathered around him. They listened raptly as he described the storm, the knock on the door, the terrified but brave young widow who had changed everything. "What is the moral of the story, Grandpa?" one of the youngest great-grandchildren asked once. Vincent thought carefully before answering. "The moral is that sometimes the best things in life come from simply being kind, from opening your door when someone knocks, from offering help without expecting anything in return, and from recognizing love when it finds you, even if it arrives in an unexpected package on a stormy night." When Vincent passed away at the age of 73, he was surrounded by family. His last words were of Catherine, calling her name with a smile on his face. The family buried him next to her on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place they had both loved most in the world. The ranch continued through the generations, each one building on what Vincent and Catherine had created. Their story became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The house they had built and expanded remained standing, lovingly maintained, a physical reminder of where it all began. Matthew's son eventually took over full operation of the ranch, and his children after him. But they all remembered the story of their great-great-grandparents, the cowboy and the widow who had built something lasting from a single act of kindness on a stormy night. Years later, one of the great-great-grandchildren found a journal that Catherine had kept during her first years with Vincent. The entries were simple but heartfelt, chronicling the growth of their love and the building of their life together. One entry, written a year after their wedding, read, "I came to his door with nothing but fear and desperation, a widow running from people who wanted to control me. Vincent asked me nothing except if I needed help. He gave me shelter, safety, respect, and eventually love. He let me find my own way while walking beside me every step. I thought I was running from something, but I was actually running toward everything I needed, toward home, toward love, toward the life I was always meant to have. They say everything happens for a reason. I believe the storm that night happened to bring me to Vincent's door, to the man I was meant to love, to the life we were meant to build together. I will be grateful for that storm, and for the cowboy who opened his door, for the rest of my days." The journal was placed in a place of honor in the ranch house, a testament to the love story that had started everything. And on stormy nights, when thunder rolled across the Kansas prairie and rain beat against the roof, The family members living there would sometimes look at the door and imagine that long-ago night when everything changed, when a widow knocked and a cowboy answered, and two lives became one. The legacy of Vincent and Catherine Sawyer lived on not just in land and buildings and cattle, but in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren and all who came after. Values of kindness, partnership, respect, and love. Values that said every person deserved dignity and choice, that marriage was a partnership of equals, that sometimes the greatest gifts arrived unexpectedly in the middle of a storm. Their love story became the foundation upon which generations built their lives, a reminder that opening your door and your heart to someone in need could change not just their life, but your own in ways you could never imagine. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of finding love when you least expected it, and building something lasting from a single moment of compassion. In the end, Vincent and Catherine's story was simple but profound. A widow showed up at a cowboy's door in a storm. He let her in and never asked her to leave. And from that one act of kindness, a love story unfolded that would span decades and touch countless lives, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest of gestures, with choosing to help rather than turn away, with opening not just your door but your heart to the possibility of love.